Hello there. It is Wednesday, August 1st, 2018, and this, my friends, is the MMA Fighting Live Chat. Thank you again so much for joining us today. My name is Shaun Al-Shatti, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend. He was in Calgary for UFC on Fox last week. This week, he's back home in Los Angeles for a home game at UFC 227. The workhorse himself, Mr. Marc Raimondi. How's everything, Marc?
Oh, I'm just doing fantastic, Shaun. I'm in the bottom of a submarine. I'm in the ocean. I'm actually in what looks like a sauna, right? It looks like one of these like steam rooms that many a fighter at UFC 227 will be using later on this week. Actually, in reality, I'm in the Vox Media office in Los Angeles. We're trying a new spot because the last time I was here, it was very echoey. I have a new device, an audio device, this mic right here. It's awesome. Hopefully, we promised that we would get 1% better every week. Hopefully, we're getting better. Hopefully, this sounds good. Hopefully, the video is good. We already know that we look good, Shaun, in real life.
Yes.
We just want to make sure this live chat looks good on the internets.
I did notice that it looks like you're in a sauna, and I was wondering if you were getting any sleep between all this fight coverage that you're doing for us. It looks like you're almost just cutting weight already.
Well, look, I have a hard weight cut for UFC 227. I need to make 125 pounds just in case Henry Cejudo or Demetrius Johnson falls off the card. Not really. Although I probably could make 125. I'm of that height range, I guess, right? But I'm a little fat right now, though. Not gonna lie.
What's your walk around weight? Like, is Andy Foster letting you cut down that much?
We are in California, so that could be a bit of a problem. My walk around weight right now is a little bit heavy. It's like in the high 140s, which is a bit heavy for me. Maybe even like 150. I'm usually, if I'm fit, I'm usually less than that. But I have been doing a little bit of lifting. Look, we're doing the live chat. We're following Luke Thomas. I feel like I've also seen a few grays in this. I mean, some semblance of a beard here, and I feel like I am becoming like a miniature version of Luke a little bit. Got a little bit of a beard. I got the little beard. I'm a much smaller man. I think I'm becoming like a little bit. I'm not nearly as salty as Luke.
Give it time. Give it time.
But just give us a few more live chats, and I think I'll get there.
Give it a year, and you're gonna be this big burly bearded motherfucker. It's gonna be great. Okay, so enough about that. We have a lot to talk about today. It is fight week, UFC 227 this weekend, featuring two title rematches. Demetrius Johnson obviously looks to extend his record-breaking flyweight title reign against Henry Cejudo. And then the main event, the rivalry between TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt, renews, bantamweight strap on the line. Also this week, Conor McGregor is officially a free man. Will and when the fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov come to fruition. We'll get into all of that and more today. But first, UFC on Fox 30. This took place this past Saturday, and it was a banger of a card, Marc, full of huge names, big performances. But some unexpected news came down yesterday, and honestly, it was a little bit troubling news coming out from our own Dave Meltzer. UFC on Fox 30, to quote Dave, officially the lowest rated event in the 7-year history of the UFC on Fox series. And this is despite going against very little in the way of live sports competition, and also despite the card featuring several fighters who have been in very, very big fights, whether it's Jose Aldo or Joanna Jędrzejczyk. The final ratings number, to quote Dave, was 18% down from the July show last year and 41% down from 2 years ago. And I'll remind you that last year's card was the Chris Weidman versus Kelvin Gastelum card from New York, which was basically a one-fight card. Elkins versus Bermudez was the co-main there. So, man, there's a lot to unpack here, Marc. I guess, honestly, this was surprising to me, and again, a little troubling. First of all, do you feel the same? What do you make of all this?
It's not good. I mean, look, I think that we know that ratings are going down. We know that pay-per-view buys are going down. That's been the trend lately. That's not a surprise. But a card like that to do the worst number ever in the 7-year history of UFC on Fox, that was shocking. That was shocking to me because I was in Calgary last week, and there was a feeling that this was maybe not the biggest card in the world, but there was some excitement about it because of who was on the card and the fights that were going to be on the card. If you're a fight fan and you're missing out on Alvarez Poirier, that's very surprising. That had fight of the year potential going in. Plus, you have Jose Aldo, the best featherweight of all time. You have Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the most dominant women's strawweight champion of all time. Both former champs now, but still, these are people who have headline cards. Some of them have headline pay-per-views. So in that sense, it was very surprising. Again, not surprising that it wasn't the best number ever, but surprising that it was the worst. I couldn't believe that it was the worst ever, especially like you said, compared to 2 years ago, Shevchenko versus Holm. Was it more than 40% less in terms of ratings than that card? Very surprising, and it just I think it's a testament to the fact that there are a lot of cards right now. I think that there's a little bit of a saturation point with the UFC. I think that you see that with the pay-per-view numbers. We were just talking, Shaun, 2 weeks ago about the UFC 226 pay-per-view numbers not being great, surprisingly, because that was such a great fight. And also the thread that kind of ties those things together is that great fights, great fighters, but maybe not the biggest names. And they're solid names, and for us in the MMA bubble, we know these people and we want to watch them, but not the kind of name that will transfer over to the mainstream. And it seems like if you look at the numbers, that baseline, that low number, the base mint, I guess you could say, of what the hardcore fans used to be, has deteriorated a little bit. You could almost always count on a certain number for these cards, for a pay-per-view card, but that basement has gotten smaller over the last year plus, I would say.
Yeah, it is pretty shocking, just in a sense that this is the lowest ever. Like, if you just think even recently of some of the Fox cards we've gotten compared to this one, it's not even close, man. Like, you look at Jeremy Stevens versus Josh Emmett or something like that, more people tuned in for that than a card like this, where the top 3 fights were basically like a very good pay-per-view quality. And again, Jose Aldo's a guy who's been in, the UFC 189, sold a lot of pay-per-views. Joanna Jędrzejczyk's been on the undercard of a lot of big pay-per-views. And to see something like this, is this more of a symptom of lack of promotion? Like, I don't know that there was a lot of promotion leading up to this. It feels like not a lot of people knew about this fight. I didn't hear a lot about this fight. Or is this just something far indicative of a far greater issue that we're facing in this sport?
Yeah, because I feel like it isn't just lack of promotion, because the numbers are down everywhere. This is not just this card. This is just kind of the latest example of where we're at right now with UFC ratings and pay-per-view buys. I think this is all a symptom of really a few things. I think that you have a fight like Alvarez Poirier, and it's going to be an exciting fight. I mean, you could not even pencil that in. You could put that in pen that it's going to be an exciting fight. But that's never been enough to get people who are not hardcore fans to tune in. So there's that element of it. But one thing that you could maybe draw people in more with is some kind of stakes. That was always something about the UFC in earlier years that you could point to as, well, okay, the winner of this fight goes here next. The winner of this fight gets a title shot. The winner of this fight, there's some kind of path. And there doesn't seem to be that kind of path right now in the UFC. And I think, Shaun, the best example of this is the Woodley-Till fight. Tyron Woodley versus Darren Till. Colby Covington wins the interim welterweight championship at UFC 225. He beats Rafael dos Anjos. He is the guy. He is now the #1 contender for the undisputed title that Woodley holds, right? That's the path. We know that people like to look at the future. People like to see, where is this going? They don't want to just watch fights. They want to see where this is going. And when they booked Woodley versus Till, and they cast aside Covington, and essentially he's probably going to vacate the interim title, which is just a silly turn of phrase in itself, vacating an interim title. There's no path, right? I mean, you're watching these fights to see what happens next. And when you just kind of cast someone aside and try to fill a spot on a card, what are we watching? What is the path that we're following? And that really is the issue. There's so many cards. There are so many fights per card. And you have main events to fill, you have spots to fill, so as matchmakers, Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard are fantastic matchmakers, but they have 13 fights per card, they have 40 plus cards per year. They need to fill those spots. Those cards are not going away. If they don't fill the spot, they're screwed, right? So they have a main event at UFC 228. They have to fill the spot. Woodley's available. What do? There's no other champion available. You got to put if Covington's not available, you got to get somebody else. You got to get Till. But that you lose that tie that the fans have to watching these fighters and watching their career and the trajectory, because there is no trajectory. It's, well, we got a spot to fill. I think, wasn't it Joe Silva, Shaun, that said that at some point in the UFC as matchmaker, he went from a fine dining, culinary artist to a short order cook. And that's kind of what Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard have to deal with. They have to fill all these spots.
Yeah, absolutely. And you almost wonder, like we've been talking for years, whether this sort of thing is these checks are gonna be cashed eventually. This sort of deteriorative effect that we've seen build up over the past couple of years. I almost wonder now if like that is actually coming to roost. Like these checks are finally being cashed and it's all kind of culminating in whatever this stretch is, where it seems like everywhere across the board, not only UFC, but Bellator, everything is going down in terms of there's no more upward climb, and it's not even a steep, it's not even like a steady decline. It's like a pretty sharp decline. And to jump into some reader questions, and I wish we had something more positive to talk about initially, but it kind of feels like a big deal. The first question that we're going to address is from the website, Zaku Kogeti. I hope I'm saying that right. UFC 227 pay-per-view buys. What do you guys feel like is the over-under for this Saturday's pay-per-view event? Who wins the co-main and main event? I don't wonder. I know for a fact that after an event like last weekend doing so poorly, man, I feel like UFC 227 is in real trouble. What do you think about it, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, over/under, I would say 200,000 pay-per-view buys. I don't know if it does better than that. I really don't know. I think I don't like to predict that kind of thing until I see how Fight Week goes and I see how the interest it looks. But then again, I kind of did that last week in Calgary, and it was fool's gold, because it seemed like in Calgary anyway that it was a big fight card. The fans were great at open workouts. They were great for weigh-ins. I thought, okay, this has some steam behind it. What was not the case. Don't know if it'll be different this week in LA, but yeah, I can't imagine it doing a big number. And I think also, Shaun, I think this is also a case of, and we talked about this, and other people talked about it, the Reebok stuff, the Reebok stuff, and not, there's no individuality, and it's hard for fighters to stand out over the crowd with when everyone is wearing essentially the same thing. Okay, maybe the colors are a little bit different now, but there's no one is standing out. Everyone looks the same.
There's no individualization. There's no individualization at all. And you even saw it at UFC on Fox 30, where Ion Kutelaba comes out doing the Bret Hart thing, and that alone feels like it's a big deal just because it's something different. But meanwhile, he wanted to do something for weigh-ins. He had a surprise that got nixed. It's just everyone's a creative fighter now. If to use a video game term, like it's just the most generic handling of it possible. And this is a sport where it's a very individualized sport. Guys have to make their own brands. Fighters have to build a brand around them. And you're right, it is basically impossible at this point, unless you're someone like an Israel Adesanya who can sort of do that inside the cage alongside outside the cage.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying go full pro wrestling or anything like that, and I'm not saying like go full cosplay like some of the fighters in Invicta do for weigh-ins, which I find fun, but that's not everyone's cup of tea. But individuality is a big part of fight sports, right? I mean, Chuck Liddell became big. You think Chuck Liddell would have been as big as he was if he was just wearing Reebok shorts instead of his Iceman, his trademark blue shorts? Yeah. You think Tito Ortiz would be as big as he was if he wasn't able to wear the flame shirts and to do everything that he did? I mean, those guys were big stars, and they would have been big stars, but what made them stood out was really what helped propel them to those great heights. And you can say that about pretty much every fighter. I mean, everyone remembers Anderson Silva's, yellow shorts. I mean, these are things that were trademarks of these fighters, and they no longer have that. And I'm at the UFC 227 media lunch yesterday with Cody Garbrandt, and this is a good looking dude. He's got his tattoos. He's got it all together, man. He's a good looking guy. And he has that individuality when he dresses outside of fight week, and then you throw him in some Reebok stuff. I would love to see what Cody Garbrandt would look like if he could design his own gear, and he can wear his own shorts on fight night, to see what he would look like. Because I feel like that is a missing thing, and that's a big part. Look, again, not saying go full pro wrestling, but fans for the majority of people in the world, and you and I are different, and a lot of people that are probably watching this live chat are different because we're hardcore fans and you guys are hardcore fans. But for the majority of human beings in this world, just watching fights is not enough. There needs to be some kind of engagement with fighters. There needs to be some kind of connection, some kind of familiarity, some kind of investment in these fighters. And when everyone is wearing the same thing and no one stands out, it's hard to find where that investment comes from. And not everyone's going to be a great talker like Adesanya, like Conor McGregor. There needs to be something else. GSP is a good example of that too. He wasn't the best talker, but you can connect to him because of the stuff that he wore, because of how he carried himself. He wore the gi. You know, he had like the Japanese flag on his I mean, those are the kind of things that are missing now. And I think that's coming back to hurt the UFC in the ratings and the pay-per-view, guys. I really, really do.
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, but I guess my last thing I want to say about this is we're kind of seeing a similar effect in other sports as well. If you look outside of the MMA bubble, I mean, football and baseball are two sports where obviously there are much larger issues at play for both of those sports. Baseball, it's just generally the fan base is aging out. The young people do not care about baseball for the most part. Football, there's a lot more political issues involved with that. But in general, football and baseball are dealing with issues very similar in that it's very hard for them to build their own stars just based on, in football, I mean, they're wearing helmets. Everybody looks very similar. In baseball, I don't know. There's other things involved there. Whereas basketball has never been more popular in the world. And it's purely, I mean, not purely, but a large part of it is each individual athlete is able to build their own brand. You see their faces, you see sort of the brand that comes up with them, and people are able to identify with them and, follow their favorite player and buy their favorite players' things and really identify with all of that. And MMA used to be that, man. Like MMA a decade ago, 20 years ago, people felt real connections to a lot of these fighters, and it really feels like that's getting harder and harder. And I just don't. I mean, it's worrisome, man. It's worrisome to see these kind of numbers, and it feels as though we do need a big fight. Like we need like a Conor fight or something back just to like get some enthusiasm back in this sport.
And just one thing to add to that, Shaun, some of those shirts of the past, those trademark MMA shirts, the Affliction, the Tap Out shirts, not the prettiest shirts to look at. But no. you did see them around though, didn't you? Like when you went to the mall or you went to the movies or you were out and about during the course of your day, you saw a Tap Out shirt or you saw an Affliction shirt, something like that had that MMA tie. Are you seeing any Reebok shirts out there right now? I mean, I don't feel like they get. I don't feel like they get at all the fan base, the fighters, the culture of the sport at all. And I mean, look, it's a cleaner look. Sure, that's fine, but this is cage fighting. This is not about a clean look. This is about individuality. That's how I feel. That's my opinion. You're
telling me you're not seeing all sorts of Reebok fight kits just out in the wild?
Pretty much never. I don't think I've ever seen one outside of a UFC event. And I live in Los Angeles. I mean, there's no hotter place for MMA than Southern California. And I mean, maybe I've seen one or two like McGregor fight kits, but I've never seen anyone else. Certainly, maybe I've seen McGregor. I don't even know if I've seen that.
All right, well, let's move on. Let's talk about some positive stuff. How about that? So UFC 227 this weekend, 2 title rematches. And we have a question from BCG347 on the website. Is everyone overlooking Henry Cejudo? I've noticed very little talk of Cejudo challenging for the title, he writes. This looks like it could be one of those situations where the outcome seems like a foregone conclusion that everything gets turned on its head. For example, Pettis versus RDA, McGregor versus Diaz 1, GSP Serra, Velasquez Verdum. He says Cejudo is an Olympic gold medalist and a obsessively competitive athlete. Do you guys think we are in for a crazy, unexpected upset this weekend? What do you think, Marc?
Never say never. I mean, I don't know if I would go as far as to say I think Henry Cejudo will win, but certainly he could win. If you just look at history, though, DJ has been dominant, and he finished Cejudo the last time, and I don't know if anything significantly has changed since then. So
whoa, I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, as far as DJ goes, I think Cejudo has improved. Sure. But has he improved to the point where he can beat Demetrius Johnson? I don't know. I don't know that. I'm curious to see the fight. I think Henry Cejudo is a future star. I like him a lot. I think he's got a great personality. I think he's got charisma. I think he's a guy who can be an ambassador for the UFC. But is now the time for him to beat Demetrius Johnson? I don't know. With that being said, this is MMA. Anything can happen. We've seen weird things happen. UFC 199 was in Los Angeles, and Michael Bisping knocked out Luke Rockhold in the first round. No one saw that coming. So you can never tell when these things will happen, and sometimes it's just a collision course of factors going in, and sometimes it's just weird stuff. But yeah, I mean, Cejudo is good enough to certainly make Johnson really work for it.
Yeah, you know, I will say one thing Henry Cejudo has in his favor going for him. I mean, we talk about world-class athlete all the time.
Easy for you to say, right?
Yeah, I know, right? But he is a true world-class blue chip athlete. I mean, this is a man, I know people roll their eyes at it because they hear it all the time, but this is a man who was literally the youngest American to ever win a gold medal in freestyle wrestling. He is a remarkable competitor. And when he fought DJ, he was basically like 1 or 2 years into his MMA career. Like he had just started. He was a brand new baby to this game. And, you know, I spoke to Henry a couple weeks ago ahead of this fight, and it's interesting kind of hearing from him his perspective on that whole experience fighting DJ, where he admits now that he was very ahead of himself. Like he wasn't ready for it. And that almost like changed his worldview in a very interesting way, where he started becoming this almost like Ronin-esque character, where he shed a lot of people around in his life, and he started traveling to Brazil and Europe and Thailand and all these places, collecting knowledge in different disciplines from these various, you know, training partners and masters. And I feel like we've seen it, man. Like we've seen some results from that in the cage. His first fight after DJ was the Benavidez fight, and he looked tremendous against Joseph Benavidez. And that was before Joseph Benavidez got hurt again. And so that was like a peak Joseph Benavidez, and Henry Cejudo arguably could have won that fight. And then the Wilson Hayes fight like just blew me away. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Like he looked like he looks like a completely different fighter. He's coming out with this wide open, almost like karate style stance, very, very fluid striking. He just decimated him. And then Sergio Pettis, man, like Sergio Pettis is probably, I think, number 2 or 3 in that division right now. And Henry Cejudo utterly dominated him. I feel like when it comes to how these guys have changed since their first fight at UFC, I think, what was it, 197? Something like that.
That was the Jones OSP card.
Yeah. Since that first fight, DJ has improved, but I feel like Henry has markedly improved. Like his improvement has been leaps and bounds, and he's finally becoming who he actually is as an actual fighter, because he is finally now, you know, several years into this as opposed to brand new. And I think there is something to be said when it comes to that.
Sorry, I just got an email back from the UFC on a story that I'm working on. This is the Betche Correia situation.
Oh,
so well, of course we know that.
Before we jump into that, I want to ask you something about this Cejudo DJ fight that Henry brought up to me, and I've been thinking about ever since. I'm not sure I have a right answer. Henry believes that him winning would basically be an ideal outcome for the UFC. The UFC would prefer that because essentially there has been no other flyweight champion, obviously, other than Demetrius Johnson, and he says is starting to feel stale. I can see where he's coming from. Do you feel what do you feel like would be the best outcome for the UFC on Saturday? Would that be a DJ win and keeping this train going, or a Henry Cejudo upset to basically upturn this whole apple cart and basically change this whole division, make everything new again?
I mean, I could see where some kind of change would be beneficial in a way, because Demetrius Johnson, as good as he is, we know that the numbers are not always there. In fact, they're kind of rarely there for his fights, and he's the best pound for pound fighter in the world, and then he's a co-main event at UFC 227. So that kind of speaks volumes a little bit. So it's hard to say what's better, a dominant champion or parity in the division. I don't think there would be parity in the division necessarily if Cejudo wins, but you saw someone like Anderson Silva, where wasn't a big draw until he was the champion for a long time. He had that winning streak, and he became almost this like unbeatable guy. Of course, he had that foil in Chael Sonnen. He had the knockout win over Vitor Belfort that propelled him and made him a bigger draw than he was. I think that if DJ was able to have that kind of foil, and have that kind of those moments. And he's having some of those moments now. That Ray Borg, that submission was just incredible, and that should help. I mean, that should help him in theory become a bigger star. But maybe he doesn't have the foil, the opponent who's going to bring that out of him. That Chael. There's no Chael Sonnen in a flyweight, right? There's no one who's going to put to use pro wrestling parlance, put Johnson over the way that Chael Sonnen put over Anderson Silva. Is Cejudo that person? I don't know. Certainly, though, I think that it would add some more intrigue to that division if Cejudo were to beat Johnson. Look, I mean, I think that in our bubble, a Demetrius Johnson loss would be crazy. It would be like I don't feel like most people are expecting it. So I think in the MMA bubble, I think it would be like, whoa, DJ lost, Mighty Mouse lost. Are you kidding me? Like what happened here? It would be big news for a little bit. That would probably overshadow whatever happens in the main event on Saturday night. Would it extend past us? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, Henry Cejudo might be one of those guys who could translate over just because of his past success, but it would be big news, right? Like it would be the biggest news ever at flyweight, basically. I mean, the rematch between Henry Cejudo and DJ at that point would probably be one of the more intriguing, if not the most intriguing flyweight fight ever. Or I guess the rubber match, if you will. But there's a long way to go until then. And you know, we'll have a fun week ahead of us with you in Los Angeles covering this fight. So let's move on right now. We have I just saw this. This is very silly. The next question is from Overheem's Chin. He asks, who wins in this fantasy matchup? Shaun versus Marc, unified rules. I would say immediately there is a large size discrepancy here, so I don't know that this is a fair question.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Come on. Shaun, how tall are you?
Maybe like 6 foot, 6'1" on a great day.
I am all of 5'6". Everyone, and people are gonna come back laughing that I'm shorter than that. But that is what my driver's license says, and that is what I'm sticking to, ladies and gentlemen. It's not even close. How much do you weigh?
I fluctuate between 185 and 200.
So you're saying you can cut to like 145? That's what you're saying? If you're doing a UFC style weight cut?
If I'm going my max performance, probably like 170.
170. I mean, we're like 4 weight classes apart. I mean, that's not fair. That's not fair at all. Maybe in a handicap match, I'll get Danny Segura in here, and we'll try to beat you in a handicap match. Not actually in here. This is a very small room.
I mean, the close quarters might help you, but if you're getting enlisting a partner, I'm going and grabbing Luke. Like
that's just not fair.
Win. I'm just gonna win at that point.
That's not fair. Luke is immense.
He's just going to be throwing y'all.
Look,
he's going to throw y'all around like a world's strongest man competition.
Our staff is ridiculously large, and I am the short one, and it's hard, man. It's hard at times. Dave Doyle is like what 6'2", 6'3". Luke is like 6'5". Brian Tucker, our editor, is like 6'3", 6'4". He is 6'4".
Chuck is like 6'2".
And I'm 5'6" on my tiptoes. Like what is going on here?
You're bringing the average down, man. You're really hurting the average.
I don't know what to say, man. I was born this way.
All I'll say is that I think it's safe to say that MMA fighting would dominate in a basketball game when it came to a media versus media basketball game. And also, I'll take us in a brawl, in like the Warriors movie style brawl against any other media team. I'm just running behind Luke at that point. Like, if none of you all have ever sat behind Luke, like he is, or just stood by him, he is basically one of the largest men I've ever encountered in my life, and it's ridiculous. And I've covered basketball before. I've like stood next to Shaq, and Luke's just massive. It's not even fair.
Dave Doyle told me that the first time he met Luke, because they didn't actually meet in person for a while because we all work remotely, right? Luke is in DC and Dave is in LA. Dave Doyle told me that when he first met Luke a few years ago, and Dave is 6'3". Dave is a big man.
Dave's a big guy.
He said he met Luke and he's like, damn, Luke is huge. Like, Luke is so big. It's ridiculous. It's like it's barely human. Luke is a bear. He's a bear dressed as a human being.
Okay. Well, moving on. The next question comes from Jay Store on the MMA Fighting website. It says, can you guys talk about lowering the price of pay-per-views? I have a theory that what does it say? $65 per card is scaring a lot of people away. Add to that, for $65, you don't even get the full card. You get You get that usually if you have Fight Pass and a cable TV subscription on top of it. For me, not many cards meet the bang for your buck test, he writes. I'm curious if a lot of people feel this way. Could the UFC possibly make more money by selling more pay-per-views at a lower cost? What do you think?
I look, they have their studies they do, and they have their ways of finding out what works and why. And obviously something told them to raise prices. What was it about? I mean, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago at this point. I can certainly see the point, because some of the cards that are being presented right now, and you see the price tag at $65, and you're like, is this really worth all that money? I mean, look, it's a strange evolving world in terms of consumption of media and consumption of live events. There's a lot of streaming services that are now, especially for MMA fans, are going to be added to this regular cost. There's going to be the DAZN price for if you want to watch Bellator. There is already UFC Fight Pass. There's going to be ESPN Plus. So I can understand why people are kind of maybe deciding, I don't need to spend $65 on these cards. I don't need to spend $65 on UFC 227. I get it. I do. And I do think there is an element of, if this was $40, okay, maybe you buy it. But the UFC has to weigh that idea where it's like, well, if we sell X amount of pay-per-views at $65, are we making more than selling whatever we would sell at $40? And I think that it seems to me their metrics indicate that selling it at $65, even it may be fewer viewers, fewer buys, they're still making more money. I mean, that is the key, right? That's why Maymac is $100. That's why, Maypack is $100, because they know they can make that. I mean, it may not be as many buys, and it was a ton of buys, but it would have been more if it was like 65, right? But they know they can make a greater profit if it is for at that higher price point. So I think that's why the UFC did it, and I don't see it going down anytime soon.
No, I think it's only, if it does change, I think it's probably going up. And just to play devil's advocate, I mean, the change from 55 to 65 was a recent thing. Like that it was an incremental thing where am I mistaken? But I think it went to 60 first, right? It went to 50. Yeah. And so this has just been a slow crawl up. I do wonder though, at what point is the UFC cutting off its nose to spite its face, where this is just a detrimental obstacle barrier for people to clear to actually consume their content. I mean, I talk about it all the time, but it's very expensive to be an MMA fan, especially compared to being a fan of any other major sport. With all these streaming services coming out now, with ESPN, DAZN, and now the pay-per-view, and obviously pay-per-views monthly, it costs so much money to be an MMA fan. And I don't know, if I wasn't doing this for a job, I don't know that I would be investing in all of this at this point. It's so saturated. But I do wonder, just on a base level, I mean, DJ, this weekend is a good test, right? Because like DJ versus Cejudo and TJ versus Cody, we saw both those fights like within the past year or two. Like none of these fights and both of them ended quickly. Like one was a first round knockout, one was a second round knockout. Nobody was clamoring for either of these rematches, really. The fight most people wanted was DJ versus TJ, and then we kind of got this weird amalgamation of this instead. And so I do wonder, man, whether this weekend's gonna prove to be a new low when it comes to pay-per-views, because I don't feel any buzz for this yet. I'm not in Los Angeles like you are, but do you feel any buzz at all for this card yet? I mean, fight week starts today. Fight week starts tonight. Yeah. Like,
I don't feel any buzz yet, but it's still early. I mean, we'll see how many people show up to open workouts. Are 6 p.m. local time at the Novo Theater in downtown LA. So we'll see who shows up. And LA usually brings a good crowd. So I don't know if that'll be an indication or not. But the one thing that kind of comes to mind, Shaun, when we're talking about this kind of thing, with the price points and even the stuff that we talked about earlier with Reebok and individuality, I feel like for a very long time, the UFC, Dana White, the Fertittas were very much about trying to grow the sport, sometimes at detriment to their own profitability, right? I feel like that was one of their main goals, was to grow the sport even if it meant kind of taking the short-term hit. And even something like the UFC Performance Institute does not make them really any money, but they built it because it was something that they think could help the sport. But at some point down the down the line, I don't know when it was. I don't know if it was the WME era before that, but it seems like they stopped kind of trying to grow the sport, and they went to what a normal business does and try to get that short-term bang for your buck. And I think that has manifested itself over the last few years, and we're seeing that more, where the philosophy has been, let's try to make MMA as big as soccer, like Danny used to say, which he doesn't say anymore. And it became like, let's try to make as much money from the UFC as we possibly can. And it seems like there has been that change in philosophy, and I don't know what that pivot point was, but it sure seems that way.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail on the head when it comes to the sale, right? Because that seems like it really is the true inflection point where this started becoming about the short-term gain. And just anecdotally speaking, I have had so many MMA fans come up to me within the past year and just say, tell me that their interest in the sport is waning. And it's super unfortunate, man, especially when you get a card like last weekend in Calgary, where that card was one of my favorite cards we've seen all year. You had incredible moments like Jose Aldo basically rising from the dead to melt Jeremy Stephens and then breaking down in tears in the octagon. Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez settling the rivalry in true, just dramatic fashion. All of these awesome storylines and things we could be talking about. And it just feels like it's almost falling on deaf ears sometimes. And it is worrisome. And actually, this next question ties into it a little bit, because it largely, or at least not largely, but partly it is because of the absence of this man. And so this question comes from Lucian. He writes on MMA Fighting. He writes, McGregor and media responsibility. He says, I remember watching the MMA Beat a few months ago after Conor attacked the bust, with all the panelists there being solemn, condemning McGregor's action and discussing how to even handle this. Then this last week, I was watching the MMA Beat after Conor's plea deal was announced, where it was more about how great it is that McGregor's back again, and people expressing that it was a fair verdict, as Conor dolly throw McGregor ain't a threat to anyone, and think about all the money he brings to cities. Now, despite my description of the events above, this isn't meant to be an accusatory question. Rather, I'm curious, do you ever feel conflicted on how to cover McGregor? He is a huge energy source for the sport and does do big business for the media as well, so I can see the enthusiasm, but at the same time, how do you shrug off all the other stuff? So, Marc, I wonder for you, now that McGregor has sort of re-entered our life, do you feel conflicted in a sense about how to actually cover this man?
That's a really good question. And yeah, so, to an extent, certainly, I think that there is a little bit of that, and it's growing, I would say, by the year, by the month. There were incidents before where it's like, what is going on here? But you can almost explain
the Marc Goddard thing.
Well, I want to even go back further to throwing monster cans into an audience of people at MGM Grand at that Nate Diaz press conference, stuff like that. You can almost explain some of that stuff away by saying he's promoting the fight, right? You can say that about the monster can stuff, some of the other stuff. But there were some points that it got uncomfortable, like on the Maymac World Tour in Brooklyn.
Oh,
some of the stuff that he was saying about black women, and it was just like, well, we don't need all this, man. Like everything's great. Like you're killing it right now. You're about to make a ton of money. There's no reason to talk about racism and black women and gyrating like that. It was it all felt like it all felt like, what are we doing? Like, there's no reason to go down that road. And then the Marc Goddard thing with the cage at Bellator, Charlie Ward entering the cage and just acting a fool. Like, that's not fight promotion. I mean, that, some of these things you could say, Conor is a genius. He's promoting the fight. He's polarizing. That's great. I have a lot more leeway for stuff like that. But that whole thing was weird and unnecessary. And then the obviously throwing the dolly at the bus stuff was like, I mean, is that fight promotion? Yeah, he's going to fight Khabib, and look, they're going to play that video. We know the UFC is going to play that video of Conor throwing the dolly and everything that came out of it, the arrest. I mean, they're going to use all that stuff, and look, fine. They're a business. They're gonna try to make money. People are gonna watch this. It's gonna be one of the biggest fights in UFC history. But it seems like it's a bit over the line. And then like the Putin photo recently, where calling Putin like one of the greatest leaders in the world. I mean, that was like, I know he's trying to get. We know what he's doing. Like a lot of these times, like we kind of know what Conor is doing. He's trying to get in Khabib's head. He wanted to show Khabib that Putin invited him to his box of the World Cup. Didn't invite Khabib, who is Russian, but he invited Conor, an Irishman. So I get that whole thing, but to say that Putin is one of the greatest leaders, I mean, come on, man. Like that there's some serious human rights stuff going on there. And yeah, I mean, I guess you take the good with the bad, but as a journalist, you do have to make sure to put things in the proper context. And it's hard, and it is hard at times. It is hard because the guy is a supernova. The guy is a monstrous star, and he almost has made when he's not around, he almost makes things seem not as big. Things that were maybe big in the past are not as big because he's not there. When he comes into a room, when he comes into a press conference, all eyes are on him. And yeah, so you take the good with the bad with him, but you also have to make sure as a journalist to put things in proper context and call it like you see it, even if it is Conor McGregor, even if it is a guy who kind of holds the sport right now, pretty firmly.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to see how quickly we all kind of dismissed, I myself included, and just the MMA community at large dismissed this whole Dolly thing as just like, oh, that's another funny thing Conor's done. Like you look at the day of when it happened, Dana White in that back room just being like, this is the most disgusting thing that's ever happened. And he didn't know if he wanted to be in the Conor business anymore. And now it's like, well,
48 hours. 48 hours later, he was like,
it's been worse, and now it's just like, well, Conor's been punished enough. And it's like, well, I guess.
Yeah, how about Michael Chiesa? How about Ray Borg? How about the guys who couldn't fight on that card, because of that? I mean, that's not. They're not over that. That's money out of their pockets. That whole situation it really sucked, and it was so unnecessary. There was no reason to do that.
But yet this along with the Marc Goddard thing, where I mean, can you imagine Ray Borg or Michael Chiesa storming a Bellator cage and confronting Marc Goddard like that? Like,
they'd be tough in the UFC. They would never fight in the UFC again.
Yeah.
Jason High, pushed the referee a few years ago in Albuquerque after disputing a loss, and apologized right away. Banned from the UFC. Banned. Yeah. He's not allowed back. Paul Daly, he took a shot at Koscheck after the bell. Banned from the UFC. You're never seeing that guy back in the UFC, maybe. But Conor McGregor throws a dolly to the bus, injures fighters, upends an entire fight card. Hey, we're all gonna make a lot of money in a few months to get with him against Khabib. I mean, if anything, this has all shown him that you can do whatever you want. If you can make enough money, you can do. And this is how it is in other sports too. It's not just MMA. Sure. If you can make the team or the promotion a crap load of money, you can pretty much do what you want.
And again, all of those things were instantly, I guess, maybe not instantly, but pretty quickly dismissed as, oh, this is another funny thing Conor did. And even the dolly incident. I mean, if a random drifter on the side of the street picks up a dolly and hurls it through a bus window and injures a couple people, like, is that guy getting anger management classes? Like, or whatever restitution has to pay for the bus window? Like, come on. But that's just a symptom of the world we live in. Like you say, like, if you're rich and you're successful and you could provide you can provide big business for whatever your employer is, you're just it's a different world for you. The world is your oyster. And I will say though, as a journalist, it is a little bit conflicting covering Conor in a sense, but take a step back and look at a grander scheme of things. This is still the fight game, right? Like, there are a lot of really shitty things that happen in the fight game and a lot of actually really terrible things that happen in the fight game. And now I sound like Dana White being like, well, at least this is not like the worst thing ever. But like, there are a lot
worse people than Conor McGregor in the world. There are.
Yeah. And so to some degree, there is a level of being conflicted, but also, I mean, that's just the game, man. That really is just the game. You're a big star. You provide big, exciting moments for the fight, or big, exciting moments for the community. I think you get more leeway than if you were undercard guy number 4 doing this type of thing.
That's capitalism. Cheers. Capitalism.
So let's what do you think? You want to hit some Twitter questions?
Yeah, let me pull that up. So we got Bobby Atkins, to be specific. Even with the great middleweight matchups at UFC 230, lightweight and welterweight expected to be defended soon. Is DC versus TBD for the light heavyweight belt the early favorite for the main event? Only other option could be a possible Ortega Aldo interim fight. So I guess what he's asking is, what is going to be the main event of the Garden Show? That is a very good question.
That is a good question, and you know, your own Mr. Marc Raimondi over here doing some reporting last week in the middle of a fun shoot, asking DC if he's gonna defend that light heavyweight title. I don't think DC expected that. So way to go, surprise him on that. But he said he was very adamant that he wants to defend it. So that could be the DC landing spot. I mean, that would kind of give him, that would make the Brock turnaround pretty quick, to be honest, especially if he wants to do a heavyweight fight. But it's also not set in stone that they have to do that Brock fight in January. They could do that in February or March if DC needed more time. That could certainly be that is a DC in general is a big enough person, I think, to headline that Madison Square Garden show. It seems like that's going to kind of fall between the big stuff. It doesn't look like Conor Khabib's going to be on that. So that regardless of who's on that card, it's going to be overshadowed by whatever the lightweight situation is.
They really, I mean, they've been. I'm not sure why I just struggle to answer that so much, but they've been trying to stack those MSG cards with the biggest possible fights. 2 years ago, it was McGregor versus Alvarez, which did a huge number, over 1 million pay-per-view buys. Last year, it was GSP's big return against Bisping, which did very well. The MSG cards they've been kind of positioning as some of the biggest cards of the year, and they may not have the names available this year to do that unless GSP is able to come back. I don't know if he will by November. I think that might be a hard ask for someone who's still kind of dealing with that ulcerative colitis. It could be DC, but I think what could happen, and I think this is what I think DC, and I'm not privy to his thoughts or anything like that. And I felt like he might have thrown me from Calgary to LA when I asked him about the light heavyweight belt on that video.
He did not look pleased.
But I think if DC is a good businessman, and he should defend the light heavyweight belt in the co-main event of the Conor versus Khabib card, because he gets those pay-per-view points. That's what he should do. So maybe that's what he's angling for. As far as the MSG main event goes, I don't know. I don't know what they have lined up. I mean, there's nothing that's going to draw a really big number at this point. But the one thing they could possibly do is try to get Nate Diaz back in the fold. You know, I know Nate wants to fight. He said earlier this year that he wanted to fight by like June or July, and we're already today's August 1st, and he hasn't fought yet. So if there's a way to draw Nate back and put him up against somebody in that lightweight division, maybe the welterweight division, or how about 165 pounds? How about debuting the 165 pound title with a Nate Diaz fight at MSG? I'd be down. I'd be down for that. You're shaking your head. Why are you shaking?
I would love it. Hey man, I would love it. I've been campaigning for this new division for a long time. I feel like 155 and 170 has easily the most depth of the entire sport, and that's not breaking any news there. So you could siphon from both those divisions and not really cannibalize them too much. It would be 3 healthy divisions. I just don't, at this point, I'm as with you. I want to see Nate back. I don't feel like he's coming back until we figure out what's going on with Conor, because there is a damn good chance, no matter what's going on with Dustin Poirier and Tony Ferguson and all these dudes, that if Conor fights Khabib and he wins, I think that Nate Diaz trilogy fight's probably coming, just for the first fight. Because
win or lose.
Yeah, very true. Do you think Conor's going to be into rematching Dustin Poirier as much as I would love to see that? I don't feel like that's true. I don't feel like that's ever going to happen. So at this point, I'm almost resigned to Nate Diaz probably just going to sit and wait to see that, to get that figured out, because that is still a massive payday for him whenever that comes. But it will be interesting to see what we get for that MSG show, because you're right. Historically, they try to stack those events, and right now there's not a lot of good options.
Maybe they may have to stack it with just names. Maybe they'll try to get Anderson Silva in the fold on that card. I can see them maybe trying to get Cain Velasquez back for that card. Maybe not like the big main event like a GSP Bisping or McGregor versus Alvarez, but just try to stack it with those big names.
Yeah, very much so. So our next question comes on Twitter from Green Card Nick. He said, yes, and this is a very good question, something I've been thinking about. What would a loss mean for Cub Swanson this weekend? He would be 0-3 in his last 3. He also hasn't won by finish since 2013. Does Cub Swanson need a win this weekend against Renato Moicano to stay relevant?
To stay relevant, maybe, but Cub Swanson is a guy that's always like a win or 2 wins away from being right back in title contention. And Moicano is a guy that doesn't have a big name, but he's very good. He's very, very good.
Sneaky good. He's sneaky good.
He's sneaky good, and he just this will be his second fight at American Top Team. And I was talking to Mike Brown last week in Calgary. Of course, he was cornering Poirier and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And Mike Brown thinks that, of course, one of the top ATT coaches, Mike Brown thinks that Renato Moicano is, I mean, the sky is the limit for this guy. He really thinks that he could be something special. He said it when he got to ATT and he saw him like work out. He's like, this guy could beat anybody. So that's something to watch for this week with his second fight at ATT. But Cub Swanson is, I mean, the guy does not go away. He's always in that mix. He's always in that title picture. He's always exciting, and that's part of his key as well. But a third straight loss would certainly set him down the rankings. But when he goes down the rankings, he can probably beat everyone down there. You know, he can go on that 2-fight win streak. So I don't say I'll never say someone like Cub Swanson will lose relevance, but certainly 3 wins in a row will kind of put him behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, Renato Moicano is someone who is. I'm hearing echo from you now.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But meanwhile, Renato Moicano is someone who is like I said, very sneaky good in this division, man. Like he has a win over Jeremy Stevens. Like he is 4-1, I believe, in this division. He's very long, very rangy striker. He seems to get into brawls a little too much, and that has been in his undoing so far. But I mean, man, his only loss has been to Brian Ortega, and that was a fight where it was a very, very competitive fight. You could make an argument he was winning that fight until he got caught in that 3rd round submission. Cub Swanson, it's interesting. It's interesting, always interesting hearing him dissect the fight game and almost just self-reflect on himself when speaking about his position. Because, I mean, if you heard him this week on the MMA Hour, he was very upfront that he's basically being thrown into a gatekeeper role right now, where he's the guy who's going to see if Renato Moicano is at the next level in this division and ready for the tough tests. And he felt comfortable with that. Like this is a guy who's almost following along this Kenny Florian pre-Rockhold Bisping-esque journey in his martial arts career, where he's always been a very, very tough guy, a very top contender, but he has never reached that pinnacle of getting that title shot. It has been dangled in front of him over and over and over, and it's just never come to him. Often for circumstances out of his control, where if he wins a fight or two and he's promised a title shot, he just doesn't get it. And then he has to keep trying. That being said, I mean, he just signed a new contract with the UFC before his Frankie Edgar fight. And if you look at his past two losses, he's 0-2, but I mean, that was Brian Ortega and Frankie Edgar. Like it's hard to really fault a guy for losing that much. I think this is a very important fight for Cub Swanson. I mean, obviously if he wins this, or if he loses this one, his career trajectory for the immediate future for the UFC is probably vastly different. He's going to be fighting a different caliber of opponent for the next few fights. But if he wins it, man, I feel like he throws himself right back in that mix. And we just saw this past weekend with Jose Aldo kind of relighting his fire in this division. If Max Holloway is able to fight and they do Holloway versus Ortega, I would love to see Swanson finally get his rematch against Jose Aldo. That, to me, would be the perfect matchup for Cub Swanson and Jose Aldo next if Cub can win this weekend.
I'm digging it. Let's move on to Twitter. Back to Twitter. From Ian McInerney. I think I pronounced that correctly. Why does so many? I'm sorry.
Oh, I said that looks right.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Why do so many MMA pundits dismiss the effect that illegal streaming has on the PPV market? It's never been easier to find high quality illegal streams online. And I know plenty of people who only consume MMA this way.
I mean, that's a good question. I don't feel like people dismiss it. I mean, the UFC has made a strident effort to curb illegal streaming, but what can you do? I mean, you could find it in 5 seconds if you're really looking for it and you know where to look. I think that probably plays a part too in sort of the downfall of pay-per-view just over the past couple of years, not including obviously 2016, which was a ridiculous year for the UFC. But I don't feel like people overlook streaming. Like it is pretty widely known that that's very prevalent and is generally affecting pay-per-view hits.
Yeah, I mean, of course, across the board, ratings and pay-per-view buys are pretty much down because people are not only just streaming, but they're just consuming their content in different ways now with the digital space and you know, online, you know, Netflix and all that other stuff, Hulu, Amazon, blah blah blah. But to me, you can't say that the UFC's decline in pay-per-view ratings is only because of illegal streaming. Is it part of it? Certainly. But the big fights still do incredibly well. And if you're saying more people are streaming now, then why does Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz do 1.6 million pay-per-view buys? Why does Maymac do 4.4 million pay-per-view buys? I mean, and why is a card that used to do 300,000 or 400,000 now doing 100,000 pay-per-view buys? Are there that many people still streaming? Does it play a part? Absolutely. But you can't just write it off and say, oh, well, everyone's streaming it now. That's silly. People were saying that people must have streamed UFC on Fox 30 on Saturday. That's why the ratings were so low. First of all, it was on free television. It was on network TV. I'm sure there are people streaming it, but that many so that the rating is the lowest of all time, there's more at play there than just write it off as streaming. Is it a contributing factor? Yes, but there are many factors that have gone into the decline.
Well, see, it's interesting sort of the setup you gave there, right? So the big fights still do big numbers, but the smaller fights are doing smaller numbers. And I think that's actually probably symptomatic of something where a big fight is always, no matter what sport, whether it's boxing or MMA, a big fight is always going to draw in casual people. I mean, we always hear about this elusive casual person who watches these fights, but it's a very real thing. And those aren't the people who are streaming. The hardcore fans who have loved this forever are the people streaming these fights, especially now, tying back to something we were talking about earlier today, where these fights are $65, man. I can 100% understand if a hardcore MMA fan who's buying $65 pay-per-views every month and wants to see DJ Cejudo 2 and TJ versus Cody 2, but isn't supremely interested in spending $65 for that pay-per-view. I can see where they're coming from if they're streaming these fights. For these, I think there's certainly an effect on these lower tier type of shows that we're seeing, and I only think it's going to get worse. Like that's why this move to ESPN is so important, and ultimately why I hope the UFC restructures their pay-per-view business, because this is not tenable. This is not sustainable to be able to continue to do this without having these Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, John Joneses in your cabinet to be able to dish out and actually get these big pay-per-view numbers. Like, it is all going downhill, and streaming is probably a big part of it.
Fair enough. Moving back to Twitter.
Yes.
From Jan Hervo, maybe? Is it just me, or does UFC 227 really have probably the best main and co-main events ever, skill and technique-wise, while all the four athletes are in their prime? Does it get better than this? He's saying Garbrandt, Dillashaw, Johnson, Cejudo. As far as just pure skill and technique, is this the best main and co-main, headliner and co-headliner in UFC history, just in terms of skill?
So I mean, there's certainly a case to be made. I'm getting an echo from you again, Mark.
Very strange. I wonder why. I haven't changed anything.
Yes, our old friend, technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties rearing their ugly head. Is it still echoing?
No, it's good now.
There's certainly room is like. Luckily I'm a small guy, because if I don't even think Luke would even fit in this room. It is tiny. It is tiny.
I swear to God, I'm waiting for steam to rise up from this room, and it just looks like a sauna.
Maybe coming from my head, because it's getting a little warm in here. It's not really air conditioned either.
I mean, so there's certainly a case to be made where this is, one of the highest technical in terms of pairings, main and co-main. TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt, and Demetrius Johnson are all probably among the most technical fighters in the entire sport. That being said, I mean, best ever, I don't know. You got a lot of fights if you go back. I mean, even just in recent memory, I mean, I think McGregor, Aldo, Weidman, Rockhold, I would put that pairing on the same level where a lot of those guys in their prime. And if you just went back further, I'm sure there are a lot of other examples of things like this. But it is interesting to me to have a high-level pairing like this and have very little interest in it going into it. It seems as though a lot of MMA fans are writing off this event. So it is interesting to me to see sort of the dynamic at play there.
It goes back to the whole thing where, are the fights going to be great? Absolutely. I mean, these guys are at the pinnacle of the sport. They are fantastically talented. They're extremely skilled. Garbrandt and Dillashaw are, I think most people would agree, they're the two best 135ers in the world. I think a lot of people would agree that at 125, Demetrius Johnson and Cejudo are the two best in the world. And yet, what will it do on pay-per-view? Probably not all that great.
Yeah. So moving on, getting that echo again, Mark. I don't know what this is.
I don't know, man. I haven't done anything differently.
I don't know. Well, we got a question here from Belinda Evans on Twitter, who wants to know, do you or Mark like cats or own any cats? Now, this is the real question. I have three dogs.
Hard-hitting stuff here.
It's hard-hitting. I mean, you couldn't ask for better. I have three dogs. I'm a giant dog person. First of all, do you have any cats, Mark?
I'm actually allergic to cats.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Belinda.
Oh, no.
I'm allergic.
So you just don't like cats at all?
It's not that I don't like cats. It's that if I spend time around cats, my eyes start getting red and watery. I start sneezing like crazy. It's horrible. There was one time, so when I was younger, I was probably like a teenager, and I was still living at home with my mom and my sister in Queens, New York. Queens, and they did not believe me that I was allergic to cats. They did not believe me, even though I had been to like friends' houses who had cats, and I got, my eyes were watery. I felt like crap being there when the cats were in the room, and so my sister and mom decided they wanted a cat, so they brought home a cat one day. They brought home a cat, even though they knew that I said that I was allergic, but they did it anyway. I was obviously a very loved child. So within like an hour of the cat being in the house, same thing. Eyes just like puffy and red, nose running like crazy, sneezing, coughing. I felt horrible. And
did they believe you then?
They finally believed me, and they brought the cat back the next day. But it was horrible. It was horrible. My sister was like, just take a Claritin every day, you'll be fine. I'm like, I'm not gonna change my lifestyle and start popping pills because you want to have a freaking cat. That's ridiculous.
That seems like a very bizarre thing to not believe you on. It's like, oh, Mark's just lying to us. Get this cat anyway. Fuck it. Why not?
They probably just wanted me to move out already. They wanted me to go off to college or something.
There you go. They would probably send you a message. I'm not allergic to cats, but I had when I was younger, when I was like a really young kid in elementary school, my dad randomly, this stray cat was always hanging out outside of our house, and my dad randomly fed him like some bologna or something. And this cat ended up just like hanging out in our house constantly. So we just kind of adopted him. And then my parents ended up spending like thousands of dollars in vet bills for this cat over the first like week or two, just getting it healthy again. And then this effing thing just ran away like a week later. Like it went outside and never was saw from again. And that was the end of that cat experience. And so that kind of ruined my cat favorability ranking or level, I guess, for most of my life. Although I will say a buddy of mine now has a cat that is an awesome cat, and it basically acts like a dog, and it's just always like wants to be around you, and it does tricks and stuff. So I feel like I've come back around, come full circle on the whole cat issue. But for a while, I would say I was not a cat person.
Let's head back to Twitter from Only MMA here. How far ahead would you say Conor McGregor's striking is compared to Khabib? Also, do you think with the time Conor spent training boxing for the Mayweather fight, will that have helped his striking in general when he is back in MMA?
So that's basically the $10 million question, right? Like how far does McGregor's striking eclipse Khabib's? Because obviously we know in the other facet of the game, Khabib is just light years ahead of him. I think it's one of the most interesting things about this fight for me is going to be just like what has that break done for Conor in terms of you train for boxing for X number of months. It's very hard to transition back. And what does that do to your tendencies, man? Like, because he was training for a completely different rule set, completely different sport. At what point do you sort of bang out some of those natural tendencies that you have and shift them into something else? But I would say, I mean, obviously Conor's striking is far ahead of Khabib's just on a general sense, but I don't know how much that's how much we're gonna get to see that, because I mean, obviously every fight starts on its feet, but if Khabib grabs a hold of Conor, I think the skill gap there is gonna be vast.
Here's a question: which is greater, the differential in the striking between Conor and Khabib, or the differential in wrestling between Conor and Khabib, with Khabib obviously getting the advantage? Which do you think is a great discrepancy?
I mean, ultimately, I think that's the number one question. That's what's going to decide this fight. What do you think? In my head, it feels like the wrestling discrepancy is probably bigger, just on a base level. What do you think?
I mean, it's that kind of thing. I think is hard to gauge. I think it's a bit subjective, and it's hard to kind of judge because things play out very differently in MMA, because it is mixed. It's a mixed rules fight. And you're not just doing striking, you're not just doing wrestling. But I mean, I do think Khabib has an advantage because he's able to put McGregor on his back, most likely. The question is, can he get inside to do that without getting a left hand to the dome? That's really kind of where this fight is leading, and it could happen. We've seen Khabib get hit before. We've seen him not maybe have the greatest striking defense. And a fight like Alvarez and Poirier, right, is I mean, it's a great fight, and those guys are incredible. But when you think about how their fights with Conor McGregor went, you saw how competitive Alvarez and Poirier are. That fight was, and how well they do against the other people in that division, and how they can take shots. And same thing. How about Jose Aldo taking Jeremy Stephens, just taking massive shots from Jeremy Stephens, eating them, and coming back and winning with a shot to the body. And then you see what happens when Conor McGregor hits those guys. They usually fall down. That's the kind of power that he generates in that left hand. So that is the ultimate X factor, because when McGregor hits guys, they do fall down. I mean, there's proof there. I'm certainly no Conor, like, pom pom cheerleader, but facts are facts. Look at those guys now. See how they absorb blows, then watch them when McGregor fights them, they fall down.
Nate Diaz is obviously the exception to this.
Well, he falls down too, but he comes back like a zombie and gets in your face. That's just the difference.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this question, because this is something right up your wheelhouse. Jock Cotgrave, I think I'm probably not saying that right, on Twitter asks, do you have any idea who's going to be at the big press conference in LA this Friday? And I mean, that's a home game for you. You're going to be You're going to be there in LA for fight week all week this week, covering UFC 227. There is a big press conference, one of these type that the UFC does every so often, where they have a bunch of fighters and they promote the upcoming fights. Who do you think is going to be at that press conference?
Woodley and Till are definitely going to be there. I know that. I believe Marc Hunt and I think Alexei Oleinik, the two headliners for the Moscow card, will be there. As far as everyone else, I think the UFC is still in the planning phases, and there's no actual venue for that set just yet. The weigh-ins are at the Orpheum in downtown LA. I don't know if the press conference will be there as well. I hope so, just for travel purposes. But I don't know if they have that all hammered out yet. I think that they're trying to get as many main event people, maybe even co-main event people, for the rest of the year at the press conference. But in order to do that, they have to hammer out all of these fights and hammer out all of these deals. So it may not be as easy as one would think, because we still don't know. I mean, we don't know the MSG main event. We don't know a lot of these main events. Everyone wants to know, is McGregor and Nurmagomedov going to be at this press conference? Only if they get a deal done by Friday. So time is ticking, and I can't imagine it being easy. I don't think it's going to be an easy deal. It shouldn't be an easy deal. This is a big money fight. There's a lot of money on the line. Also, while we're talking about this, Khabib Nurmagomedov wants his fair share of this purse, of the revenue from this bout. He wants good money. He wants in the millions of dollars. Why are fans so resistant to fighters getting paid? What is up with that? When Khabib and his manager Ali Abdelaziz say, "Hey, we want to get paid fairly for this fight. We want what Nate Diaz got or more." Why is that such a bad thing? Why do fans hate that so much? Does not make sense. We know McGregor's going to make a ton of money. Why shouldn't Khabib Nurmagomedov make over $1 million himself? Guaranteed. He should be. I mean, the guy should be making a bunch of million. I mean, the UFC is going to make so much money on this fight. Khabib should make a ton of money on this fight as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. You said I saw a lot of comments. You're referring to who wrote speaking to Ali about his fight.
Now you're echoing.
I don't know. I'm just gonna power through.
Technical difficulties.
You're referring to the story you wrote about Ali, right? And I saw a lot of response from fans regarding that story, criticizing it. And it is interesting. I think part of it is just impatience. They want to see this fight, big fight. They don't want roadblocks. They just want it to happen. They don't care how the sausage is made. They just want it to happen. But it is symptomatic of generally a larger thing. I mean, what's up?
Your audio is jacked up, and I don't want you to lose your point, so people can't hear you.
Oh no! All right. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, we're still look. We want to honor Luke Thomas as much as we possibly can, and we know technical difficulties were a beloved part of his live chat, so we're gonna sprinkle in some from time to time.
All right, how's this? Any better?
That does sound better, but it sounds like your audio is not going through the mic.
Check. 1 2 1 2.
Oh, I mean, we can hear you now, so you can continue your point about Khabib.
Does it sound okay?
Yeah, you're not echoing anymore.
Okay, cool. So what I was just generally saying, I mean, I did notice the response to the article you're referring to that you wrote from Ali. And I think part of it is impatience, right? Like, this is a big fight. Fans just generally want this fight to happen. They want to see it. They don't want these roadblocks. They don't care how the sausage is made. They just want to see this fight. And I understand that. I mean, if I was just a fan and I didn't have to follow the minutia of this, I would just want that to appear in front of me and just happen, and that's totally understandable. Although I do think it's symptomatic of a larger point, which Cody Garbrandt actually expressed to you I think on Monday at the media lunch, where he basically said that he couldn't pull out. He didn't feel like he could pull out at 227, or not 227, but his first fight against TJ, because the financial implications, and people kind of crapped on him for that too. What were your takeaways from Cody sort of saying that?
I mean, I think accurate, right? I mean, you're talking about Garbrandt.
Yeah.
I mean, it was first of all, I appreciated his candor very much. I thought he was very open and honest about it. Not a lot of fighters, although it is happening more now, where fighters are openly discussing how much they get paid or sometimes how little they get paid. It was refreshing to hear him talk about how he's the champion. People think that he's making all this money, but in reality, he
needs to sustain them then for the rest of their life. What just in general, because that is their primary earning source, and once it goes away, it ain't coming back. Then you get to the Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz running it back at age 50 type of situation, where, or like a Chris Lieben type of situation. So, I mean, this is very important for fighters, I think, to talk about it publicly, because that's the only way change can truly be enacted. Is better, everyone has a better sense of it. But that's neither here nor there. I don't want to belabor it too much. We're winding down here. And so last question, I want to kind of set the table for you. I mean, you're going to be covering UFC 227 this coming week. And we have a question on the website from Matt the Donk that asks, what is the best under-the-radar fight you're looking forward to on UFC 227? It seems like a super top-heavy card, he says. Are there any other fights on here that he should be getting excited about?
It was funny. I was kind of looking forward to that Bethe Correia fight against Rani Aldana. I thought that could have been an exciting fight. Destroyer knockout.
Yeah, basically won because his opponent knocked himself out in a suplex. So that'll be interesting to see. I mean, he's a very highly touted prospect.
So the Bethe Correia situation. So
yes, address this.
I've been reporting on this morning, and
difficulties than usual. We're still figuring this out. This is a little frustrating, I'm not going to lie, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. But with that, I think it's time to close up shop here. So a couple last second little things to add. I mean, we're still looking for. Hopefully, this is working, but we're still looking for a name for this sucker. We need a name before it's able to go up on iTunes as a podcast. So we're going to decide on a name by next week. Please, all of your suggestions, submissions, give them to us. We're trying to figure this out, so we would love to hear from you as to what you think it should be called. Maybe not technical, maybe not something to do with technical difficulties, although understandable if that's what you feel it should be. But otherwise,
that should be the name. Should we just name it Technical Difficulties?
I mean, at this point, might as well. But I'm not gonna lie, it's frustrating. We get it figured out. But
technology, man, technology.
I mean, we have a big week ahead of us. UFC 227 in Los Angeles. Marc's gonna be there with the team. Esther Casey, Dave Doyle. We're gonna have comprehensive coverage all week. That starts tonight with open workouts. Anything you're looking forward to, Marc?
I mean, the whole card should be very interesting. I think the top 2 fights are, again, like we said.
But in the meantime, my name is Shaun Al-Shatti. For Marc Raimondi, this has been the